In our previous lecture, I spoke about the emergence of civilization in the ancient Near East, more particularly about the emergence of civilization in Egypt and Mesopotamia. In between these two great powers is the Arabian Peninsula with its northern extension on the eastern Mediterranean coast. To the north are the Hittite lands. I described Egypt and Mesopotamia as the great superpowers of the ancient world. This is somewhat analogous to the US and USSR of the Cold War period. And I recall as a graduate student keeping that idea in front of me when thinking of the conflicts between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on one's historical view, this is a conflict about which many young students are no longer aware. They're aware that America is now the great superpower, so one has to find other analogies with which to describe the ancient Near Eastern civilization. In speaking about these two great superpowers, I emphasized the development of culture and put special emphasis on the idea of writing and organization. Now, in these cultures in between, among the Hittites and the Canaanites, we have peoples who are, in a sense, buffeted by these two great cultures. They live under the influence of them because each of the superpowers had spheres of influence which they controlled. Among these peoples, whose names are familiar to many of us from the biblical narratives, are Moabites, Phoenicians, Edomites. These and many other peoples lived in the interstices, as it were, of the great superpowers of the ancient Near East. The myths of these peoples, and it is myths on which we want to focus in this series, the myths were similar to the myths of the great civilizations, but there were also striking differences. So there's influence and there's difference. I will move from the question of the Canaanites, who were they, and their description, to conclude the lecture with the story of the Hittites, a group thought of as a lost civilization. Now, empire in the ancient Near East was focused on the two great civilizational centers, the Nile River Valley and the Tigris and the Euphrates River Valley. And at certain points in ancient Near Eastern history, we have empire emerging in the north, especially among the Hittites. We do not have this in the region of Syria and Canaan, where we have small city-states, each with their own distinctive culture. So in the first part of our lecture, I'd like to tell a tale of two cities, of two city-states in the Canaanite areas, which had a profound influence on the area. And here we can see influence as emanating from a small urban center, not influence as exerted by a great superpower. The first of our cities is Ebla, E-B-L-A, a city whose remains were found in northern Syria. And in 3000 BC, or rather in the third millennium BC, after 3000 BC, when the Old Kingdom was established in Egypt and the Sumerians were ruling in southern and central Mesopotamia, this city-state arose in Syria, between the Euphrates and the Mediterranean. And its economic and political influence was felt very widely. The site of this kingdom was discovered in the 1970s by Italian archaeologists digging in Syria. And the archives of the city were discovered within the first few years of the excavations. This was a great surprise and joy to the excavators because often excavators can dig for years before they find textual material. I mentioned in an earlier lecture that archaeological sites may yield much information because of the artifacts, but they don't always yield inscriptions. What we have in Ebla was a quick yield of thousands of documents. And these documents were basically administrative, and they told us about the economic development of the city. What they didn't offer is myth. So there was great excitement because all this material had been discovered, but there was some disappointment because nothing religious or literary was found. And I must say that reading these documents, after one reads the great myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the myth of Kumarbi of the Hittites, is quite disappointing. This is a set of materials which drones on and on. It's as if we found the ancient accounting lists of American corporations, but found none of our great books. Or if we found the accounting tapes digitized of great businesses, but we found no books, no CDs, no music. So there are certain cultures about which there's a prejudice, not always fair, that they're boring. This is often said of Ebla, but I want to assert it's not true. It's not that they're boring. It's simply that we have not found what's most interesting to historians of culture. So an Eblaite text could be a list: 3 jars of oil, 2 sheep, 7 sacks of good grain. And that's the interesting part. The less interesting part differentiates between different kinds of minerals that they're digging for. Right? This appeals to the accounting mind, but not to the literary mind. What they did keep in Ebla is some form of narrative, king lists, such as the Sumerians kept, and some fragmentary list of historical events. We know that sometime in the 3rd millennium BC, Ebla was destroyed, sometime in the mid-millennium. Then it was revived. It was destroyed again in the 2nd millennium. To clarify, I mean between 2000 and 1000. And it was destroyed again in that millennium, not to arise. Now, they found all of these documents. Whether they're boring or not, I'll leave it to the students who I hope will look at these documents to decide. What they do reveal is something fascinating about language. Here at Ebla, we have a language that has many affinities with the Semitic language group: Hebrew, Arabic, the languages of Ethiopia, Aramaic. It has many affinities with words and concepts that can be found in the Hebrew Bible, and all of this from a millennium before the Hebrew Bible. So Ebla has had a considerable effect on the study of ancient Near Eastern history, although it hasn't provided us yet with mythic material. It has provided us with what I think can be claimed to be the first dictionary. And these are bilingual lexical lists, a technical way of saying lists in which you have words in 2 languages. And you have the equivalents in Eblaite, which is what we call the language of Ebla, and Sumerian, the language of Sumer. So I think it would be fair to say that this is the world's first dictionary. So along with the world's firsts that I enumerated in the first 2 lectures in our series, I want to add this: lexicography to the accomplishments of the ancient Near East. The second city, and the city which offers a richness of mythic material, is the story of Ugarit, the city on the Mediterranean coast. Excavations there have uncovered administrative texts and mythic texts. And the story of Ugarit and its discovery has something of an Atlantis quality. That is, it appeals to our interest in civilizations that existed and then were lost, and they were barely heard of, or they were hinted at in the records of other societies, but we really didn't know where they were and what exactly they did. In Ugarit, also in Syria, closer to the Mediterranean, archaeologists, this time from France, you'll recall that the archaeologists at Ebla were from Italy, uncovered an international trading city with a highly developed culture and a great literature which had been lost to Near Eastern cultural memory.